Hey everyone, welcome back to You Are What You Love. Today, my guest is someone I am super excited to have on the show as I have been a fan of her work for a while. Her name is Mei Rothschild, and she is the creator of the Brimstone and Roses comic on Webtoon. And it's a pretty amazing comic, I think. It's very into my taste. So if you've been enjoying my taste on the show, I think you'll enjoy this. And I'm excited to get to know Mei a little bit further. So please welcome Mei to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm still just kind of shocked that you've been reading for so long. I don't know. It's weird whenever you put out content and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, people consume this." That's it's a weird feeling. I don't know how to explain it.
No,
I
it's
mean, I
so
guess you
true.
do know, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like especially on the internet, it feels like everything can be like a little bit of an echo chamber where you sort of like put it out and then you have no idea if people are actually consuming it. And there are numbers, and obviously you know that people are, but it's different when you actually get to talk to someone or get a tweet or a comment or something where they're saying, "I
Yeah,
read it."
it's like I feel like every time I post like an update or something, it's like I take a rock and I just throw it into the ocean, and then 5 minutes later, someone comes back and throws the rock back at me. It's like, "Why'd you put this here?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, wait, you saw that?" You know what I mean? I guess that's a more crass way of putting it because it's usually like very kind stuff, but I'm just like, I didn't think I'd see this again, you know?
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, I put that on the internet for you to read it, but the second that you read it, I feel weird about it." Um, well, I'm excited to have you on and talk a little bit about how you became who you are today and how you became a creator, and the things that you've worked on so far. So, I would love to just dive in and why don't you tell us what piece of media we're talking about that changed your life today?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of I guess media that has changed my life and inspired me to sort of pursue a creative path. The one that immediately comes to mind though would be Steven Universe by Rebecca Sugar. And it's only because the time that it came out, I was still it came out in I like put up the Wikipedia page just to make sure. But it came out in 2013, which is whenever I was still in high school. Yes, I was still in high school. I swear I was in high school. It was like my freshman or sophomore year. And so at that point in time, you always are kind of being or at least I was always sort of being, spoken to by my parents to figure out what I'm going to do next, especially my father. He was very, very insistent that I pick a career. And so with that in mind, I was watching a lot of Steven Universe. I've always been a fan of animation, but I kind of just wasn't consuming very much TV shows, especially not animated TV shows growing up because I didn't have cable or a TV, which as one can imagine would cause some issues. Um, but I found Steven Universe because I was constantly on Tumblr, and of course, people were going wild. Steven Universe was very remarkable for its time with its amount of diversity,
Mhm.
and of course, the music was stunning. It was a beautiful art style. There was a lot of hype for it. And so since I sort of was watching it during like a pretty difficult time in my life, whenever I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, yeah, so I watched Steven Universe in my me time, and I was just like, while I was doing homework, playing video games, and I just remember really loving it. The first season might be the weakest, but the humor was really good. I love musicals. I love the music. I love the art style. I love the characters. I was actually a big Estelle fan before it turned out that she voiced Garnet.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah, I was really excited that you picked Steven Universe because we haven't done a lot of animation so far. And I think it comes into your life at such a formative period. Like you start watching animation as a kid, and then animation can grow with you as well. And as like you explained, that this came in kind of closer to high school. And Steven Universe, I think, was like everyone kind of it really did blow up with an older age range than what was expected of it. So I'm curious, maybe just for our listeners who haven't heard of Steven Universe or have no idea what Steven Universe is or weren't on Tumblr in the peak age of it, what would you say Steven Universe is about?
of course. So Steven Universe is, in my opinion, I'm about to get into controversy already by stating this. Steven Universe is a lot about sort of discovering yourself, and I'd honestly say generational trauma, but it's more about defining yourself and who you are separate from your family and learning that your trauma does not define you necessarily,
Mm.
but your experience can shape you, and the people that you surround yourself with are also they're very helpful in forming your identity in a way because with the people that you surround yourself with, are going to be people who help shape you as a person.
Yeah, and Steven Universe is sort of like a little fantastical version of that where you've got sort of superpowers and the gems and you have a character sort of growing into that, right?
Yeah, I realize now, let me quickly just give, I guess, a brief plot synopsis, or not full synopsis, but just I'm so sorry, I realized I never explained what Steven Universe is about. Steven Universe follows, I think he's like 10, but follows it's a coming of age story that follows a child named Steven Universe who is the son of essentially the leader of a rebellion for an alien race that are called the Crystal Gems. Not the alien race, but like their rebellion squad was the
Mm.
Crystal Gems. So it is about Steven Universe now being raised by essentially the like lieutenants of the revolution, and how they are adapting to life on Earth, especially without their leader, Rose Quartz, who is Steven's mom. It's very touching. It is very heavy. It's one of
Mm.
those shows that has, like, a very friendly child, appropriate, or, like, I guess, like, childlike, audience base, and then it's like a Trojan horse. It hits you right in the face with, like, some very dark topics, very serious topics, and some of them are handled well, some of them handled less well, but what can you expect from a show that, quite frankly, was a bit shot in the leg, in its production from the beginning due to how progressive it was at the time?
Yeah, it's that show is on Cartoon Network at a time where, like, I'm a little biased, I will say I did intern at Cartoon Network, but as one of my first, like, big TV jobs, but
I think it's so cool.
it was honestly, I can't speak highly enough of the team that I worked for there, and, getting to work in that building with, as someone who has no skill whatsoever when it comes to, like, physical arts of drawing or things like that. Like, I am a writer, and I like doing comedy, and if you ask me to draw something, like, it's not gonna
No,
happen.
no,
Um,
you could try.
but it was amazing to be in that building, and at the time, Steven Universe was still on the air, and I remember when I was at Cartoon Network kind of piecing together the fact that they make this amazing content that you kind of immediately perceive as for kids, but most of the content that Cartoon Network was putting out at the time was still, and even probably going back to when we were kids too, was content that, as you say, like, takes on adult themes, like, has a Trojan horse of consuming it as an adult or as a teenager, you're getting just as much of a fulfilling experience, even though it's technically kids content.
That's honestly been a big sort of, I guess, drawing point for me in a lot of just media I consume. But also, quite frankly, in the media that I create with Brimstone and Roses, I like the idea of a goofy premise that can then tackle more serious, you know, topics, but still be, I don't want to say fun, but like entertaining
Oh,
in a
absolutely.
way.
I think that's my favorite thing about genre content in general that I think people miss a lot, like, when we talk about early Marvel movies, when we talk about, like, TV shows like Supernatural or, like, just, like, big genre pieces, you can get into really deep, like, hard points of humanity without feeling like you're having to deal with that necessarily, like, you can still have fun because we're hunting demons or we're like, fighting aliens, and it allows you to make that space where it can take some of the seriousness out of it, but then allow you to talk about the serious topic in the same way, which I think is great.
Yeah, it's Steven Universe really was very inspiring to me. I would also say something I just noticed from checking its run date. So it was in essentially my sophomore year of high school, and it ended in 2019, which is that is the year that I graduated college.
Oh,
So it was
wow.
with yeah, I watched it with or I like was seeing it during my most formative years whenever I was still working. I know that whenever I was like working through college and stuff, I'd always tune in for the updates. When Steven Universe Future came out, I lost my damn mind. The movie, amazing. But so I graduated from SCAD with a sequential art degree and then a minor in storyboarding. And my intent, what like whenever anyone asked me what I wanted to do, I was like, well, believe it or not, I was like, I really want to work for like Cartoon Network or for Netflix, and I'd like to do storyboarding.
Mm.
Um, I always pictured myself doing storyboarding. I've done storyboards before. A lot, some of them have blown up on YouTube. Um, and one of my favorite things to storyboard are musical sequences. And that's why, Steven Universe was an even bigger, draw to me because I love musicals and I love the music of Steven Universe.
Yeah, you mentioned that it came out in 2013, so you were a sophomore in high school, and I know earlier you mentioned that you kind of found it through Tumblr. Did you find it that first year at the same time and kind of dive into the show?
So I actually found it, I found its pilot, and that's because I found the pilot through an old friend of mine, who had linked it into our group chat on I think Skype at the time? I don't know what we were using. I don't know if we were using Skype or Discord. It was a long time ago, but he had linked it in and it was so for anyone who's already, like, seen Steven Universe, there was the pilot episode,
Mm.
not the first episode of the first series, but the pilot that was pitched to Cartoon Network, and the art style is very different there. The character designs in particular were why he linked it because at the time they were causing a lot of controversy
Oh, wow.
because Pearl looked rather androgynous. And people on Tumblr were a lot more, happy about it than other places, but it was causing a lot of controversy because Pearl looked androgynous and people were like, what the hell?
Sure.
Because again, this is 2013, not the most open at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he had linked it to me and I went and watched and I was like, you know, I don't think I really felt much about the character designs. I just remember thinking, "This is pretty, but this is pretty detailed for an animated show." I don't know, but I was also a big Legend of Korra fan,
Mm.
and it was a big influence to my art style, and I knew that, that was a big show at the time, and I was like, "Well, more detailed animated kid shows are showing up because I believe prior to that, I guess it was like not to say that child's animation like kids animation cannot be detailed or beautiful, it absolutely can,
Mhm.
but I'm more used to, seeing simplistic styles like I believe Uncle Grandpa, like
Mhm.
why am I blanking on the names of kids cartoons right now?
I'm, like, thinking, like, maybe this is too far back, but, like, Hey Arnold was kinda simple
Yeah,
in
Hey
terms of
Arnold, like
style.
heavy stylization, but in a more, in the American cartoon way. Steven Universe, it still had that westernized, but it had a touch of, I guess, the like mysticism of like almost like Howl's Moving Castle detail
Mm.
work with how elegant it looked,
Yeah.
and I just remember being like, "That's pretty, I don't know if it'll work." Or like, I'd like to see if they can actually do this for an entire series. And sure enough, when Steven Universe's first series came out, the styles were simplified, the color palettes were still on point though.
Sure.
It's still a beautiful show, but it was simplified for a little bit for production, and that makes complete sense. I was unsurprised, and
Yeah.
I actually really like what it looks like now compared to the pilot. Unpopular opinion.
Ooh, okay. I love a hot take early on a Tuesday or a Thursday. It's not even
So,
Tuesday.
I don't even know what day it is, so you know what? You're ahead of the curve for me because I don't even know.
Well, so were you at this point, like, already, interested in kind of animation and, creating and drawing in that sense, or were you kind of getting that idea already, like, at the sort of not there yet?
Well, so I've always drawn, I really like I like drawing, believe it or not, but, despite how much I complain, I do actually like drawing. I started drawing because I wanted to draw fan art, in fact, for the shows that I watch. It doesn't matter what show, I'm not gonna tell you because that is deep in cringe culture, and I would say,
Hey,
like,
there
cringe
is
is
no
dead except
cringe.
for me.
Yeah.
Exactly, cringe is dead, but for me, I make an exception. But yeah, so I wanted to draw fan art. And at the time I was still drawing fan art. 2013, I think I don't even know what phase I was going through. I always have like moments where I hyperfixate on stuff.
Mm,
And I had a lot of like big phases, but I think I was in my musical fan art stage at the time, or I was still drawing Dragon Age.
mm,
No, wait, Dragon Age was later, sorry. But the point is, yes, I was drawing not super seriously. I did commissions, but while I had briefly considered pursuing it as a career, my family wasn't super supportive of an artistic career, despite there being artists in our family. Maybe that was why. I don't know. Is disrespectful, but like especially because the artists that do exist in my family, they're more traditional artists.
mhm.
They weren't into commercial production.
Okay.
Um,
So more like on the fine art side of things?
yeah, so I was, it was not an easily fought battle, whenever I decided that maybe I should just go into art. First of all, I was originally going to go into medicine, I was going to go and be a doctor, and then I was, like, looking up, scholarships and then pricings, and then also your, like, college. I was doing the math was not looking good, let me tell you that. I was not It was not good. Art school is expensive, doctor school is worse, to put it lightly. But I ended up deciding that if I were to choose one, I guess I'd go into art. It seems less stressful. If I could go back, I don't know if I would have made the same choice if I'm being honest. But in art college, or sorry, whenever I also was like deciding art college, I was like, I really don't think I even need to go to college for this. And you know what? I was right because my college is crazy expensive.
Yeah.
No offense to SCAD, full offense to SCAD. Y'all didn't need to charge that much. And also, I didn't get my current job with any help from them.
Mm.
that's fine. But, maybe in the future, I'll be bending over backwards instead of being like, "Never mind, thank you, Scott, so much for all your opportunities, because now I've got XYZ job."
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe.
Is it so when you're talking about, like, you were gonna be a doctor, that's a totally different path. Were you enjoying math and science as a kid, or was it something that you were looking at as, like, this is a career path that is viable and people are my family perhaps is more interested in pursuing that?
It's a mixed thing. I've always wanted to go into medicine as a child. I find medicine fascinating.
Mm.
I like the concept of being able to help people in theory. But the nice thing about being a doctor, and specifically I wanted to go into orthopedic surgery,
Mm.
is that the person will be unconscious when I help them, which is nice because it means I don't have to talk to them. I am not the most social of people.
Mhm.
I do not have a good bedside manner at the times because if someone's panicking, and I don't have time for it, they're gonna know. And I grew up like there was my great grandfather was a doctor as well. So like there was a history of medicine in my family. And then we had, family friends that were, in the medical field. And I remember one of them, he was the father of one of my friends. And during a soccer match, because I played soccer as a kid, I like pulled my hamstring and I was injured and stuff. And he like essentially was just also the like not really volunteered, but there, so he has to do it, but field medic basically.
Mhm.
But I just remember telling him that, oh yeah, I kind of want to go into being a doctor, doing healthcare and stuff. And he was like, oh, what do you want to do? And I was like, oh, I think I want to be a surgeon. He's like, well, surgeons are assholes. You might want to. And I was like, as a kid, I was like, oh, and I was like, but they make a lot of money. He's like, yeah, that's why. And I'm like, oh. uh,
So you sort of, like, headed it off right at the pass, is like, you if you could do it, you'll make a lot of money, but you'll be a terrible person.
And I'm like, I don't even know it's true. He's just like, they just don't have good bedside manners, but you know what? They don't have to worry about that. And ever we were talking about it earlier, but TikTok, I go on TikTok and I see all these funny videos,
Mm.
with like shirts and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I should have been an orthopedic surgeon because I got weak ass noodle arms, but also I should have been an anesthesiologist. That seems way better.
Oh, yes, I have seen some very funny anesthesiologists on TikTok of all things. Like, I don't know why I get because I have, I'm very squeamish. I blood is not good for me. A surgeon path would not have worked. So I don't know what in my algorithm or search terms is sending the doctor jokes, but I get them and they are
But they're
funny.
so
Yeah.
funny, yeah, and I was like, also, people are always surprised to hear this after I say this, but I don't have steady hands.
Mm.
I shake like a chihuahua. It is so embarrassing, especially if I point it out and, like, I usually just point it out for no damn reason, so I don't know why, but it's like if I'm getting, like, my nails done or something, and I'm like, "Sorry I'm shaking so much," or, like, whenever I was getting my tattoos, I was like, "Sorry I'm shaking so much," and then it's like I'm, like, trembling, I'm like, May, why did you say anything? Because now it's just I look like I'm about to start crying,
Oh,
even though I'm
no.
fine. I'm just more nervous. I'm like, "Great, good job, May." But yeah.
So you're basically kind of like in 2013 thinking about maybe doctor, maybe artist, and then kind of end up going down the artist path. Would you say like Steven Universe was part of that turning point for you? Did you see something in that show that made you think like maybe this is the version that I want to go through, or was it just something that kind of started a path of enjoyment in that side?
I I've always enjoyed media. I think Steven Universe did help me decide definitely storyboarding just because I love animation, but Steven Universe, the messages that Steven Universe was able to cover, the more adult themes, like the music, I love music,
Yeah.
but all of that, just seeing, what is possible through animation and also sort of in a way what has become, I guess, more available, it seems, especially
Mm.
with Rebecca Sugar and her pushing LGBT content on, mainstream,
Yeah.
mainstream cable. Um, it made me really hopeful. It made me want to try to also, be in that industry and help make those pushes for, more representation. To anyone who is even slightly familiar with my comic, I'm sure that they are aware of the amount of representation in my comic, um, which is sort of a double-edged sword in a way, just because some people who have never had to worry about representation for themselves find it as a virtue signaling or like
Mm.
kind of like trying to hit all those check marks for diversity, because blah blah blah, and it makes them think that it's going to be, I don't know, I don't even know what they're expecting. They think that it's just going to be about that, like only that, and there's definitely cases where studios have handled, I guess, diversity incorrectly.
Mhm.
But whenever it comes down to more independent creators, I feel like you can put a lot more trust within them.
Yeah.
Um, and again, Steven Universe had a lot of diversity in it. I loved, all the portrayals, not only of body types but and sexualities, but also just like cultures in a way. I know that the gems are obviously a made up culture, but it's interesting to see that sort of split culture, and that sort of dysphoria with
Yeah.
Steven being half human, half gem.
Yeah.
Um, Something that is very difficult to cover, something that doesn't get covered sensitively really ever just because it's such a unique feeling, and I am adopted into a white family. I myself am Chinese,
Mm.
so I have a very uniquely isolated perspective of being separated from one's culture,
Yeah.
especially because I grew up in a predominantly white town in the deep south. There I was the only Asian in my entire town. Whenever I left that hometown, the population of 0.1% Asian went down to 0% Asian. Not great. But yeah, it was something that was really interesting to see because I don't know, discussions of that, it was always discussions that made me personally really uncomfortable. So it was interesting to see how it played out with Steven Universe,
Mm.
and see Steven, sort of learning more about his gym, like I guess like gym heritage slash culture, discovering more about his mom, and then his drama wasn't necessarily relatable. I've never really had a parent who was the leader of like related to a bunch of genocidal space aliens, but I don't know. It was interesting. It was interesting. The disconnect was there, and I kind of felt that in a way. Um, but I don't know. Steven Universe really just yeah, it opened my mind to like certain things that could be covered in a way that was digestible to, quite frankly, younger audiences that have never seen this experience before and maybe don't quite even know how to process it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that you're talking about that's really cool is the idea of maybe at that age being able to sort of process your own feelings about being disconnected from your culture through a made up culture of being able to see kind of Steven Universe processing his own issues or his own kind of connection to his heritage and where he's coming from and being able to maybe see those feelings but be able to sort of separate them in the space like you said it made you uncomfortable to talk about but you can talk about sort of an alien race and a half human, half
Yeah, it's
alien
about the
warrior.
projection. It's less of a personal attack if it's not happening to me directly.
Oh, I 100% agree. Yeah, I was as you were talking about it, I was thinking about, I don't know if if you've seen the more recent Aquaman with Jason Momoa, but
I I'm
I
sorry.
know it's so okay. I highly recommend it actually, because I remember seeing that movie in theaters with my sister and we're mixed race and seeing it I mean, the main kind of plot point that you wouldn't necessarily expect is that Aquaman is half human, half, aqua? I don't he's
Half
a
fish?
fish, and the fish merman, I suppose, mermaid, Atlantean, I think is actually the technical
Yes,
term.
yeah, that we got it, we got
But you get to see sort of like his war between saving a culture that sort of rejected him on the Atlantean side and saving his own, kind of human culture and connecting with his dad and that made a good I thought a very interesting choice of making the Atlantean race sort of white and making his father to more represent Jason's actual background. Um and so it was a great way to watch a cool action movie where a man is sort of half fish and as opposed to mixed race, but to have that same conversation. And it sounds like kind of something similar with Steven Universe where you're able to, like we talked about earlier, where you can use genre to sort of have those conversations and to have those conversations for a piece of media that maybe was more directed at children or airing towards children in general too. To be able to sort of just watch that and say like, okay, like I see those feelings and I recognize them, but obviously I don't have to talk about it because he's an alien. Like he's a half alien. It's cool. It's a really cool space to be able to kind of make that separation. Did it feel like it gave you maybe language to talk about things or a way to process how you were feeling about that disconnection of being in such a predominantly white space?
Oh, girl, you know that stuff is very deep. That is under the repression cover. No, no, it did not personally, but, I like that it gave me that option to. I'm not going to explore that because I'm not ready for that personally, but I like that it was there, and I liked the idea of knowing that, like, maybe people who are more open to talk about their feelings than me would be able to, you know what I mean?
For sure, and for you, you can just project and not think about it, which is great too. I think
Exactly.
that's a
Yeah, I'm
piece
like
of healing as well.
I think, like, what a coincidence, my therapist has the same thing. She was like, "So, do you wanna talk about that, May?" I'm like, "No, not really." And she's like, "Oh, okay." I'm like
You're like, "No, I don't. I wanna watch." I think it's great too because you did very eloquently put together kind of Steven's experience, and you were able to talk about that and articulate it, and I think to some degree, there's something nice about being able to articulate something that's being projected in media that you ultimately do relate to, but without having to necessarily say, like, "Here are the things that I feel and how they relate to me and how I am feeling about those things," but to be able to sort of I think that's part of what makes media and, like, fandom so intriguing, especially when it comes to things like uh, fantastical elements where you're able to have that separation from reality is like you can talk about that and have those feelings and articulate those feelings without having to be like, here is how I feel about myself. Like,
For sure, for sure, and I think that, to be honest, though, it's like, and I'm gonna guess get insight slightly messy, but sort of, it's just Steven Universe was very controversial,
mm,
understandably, something that just happens with queer content, with POC content is that, um, it's held under a much bigger microscopic lens than media that doesn't dare to add diversity.
mm,
Um, and it's very difficult because, of course, not everyone's experience is going to be the same. So, while I personally, like you and I, we were just talking about, how sort of like cultural disconnect that comes with growing up, like either, adopted or biracial. That disconnect, has been often portrayed through, fictional races and stuff. And I know that other people of color who are mixed or who are adopted find that offensive because they don't
sure.
like being portrayed as like, something fantasy or monstrous because, it's obviously, these are real people, real cultures, real emotions. And that's all very fair. And you're always going to have, different views on that.
Mm.
But I also remember, so I don't know why I'm randomly just like, let me be negative. But yeah, Steven Universe also, of course, had many, many complaints. With everything, of course, I have definitely agree with some of the criticisms made, make no mistake. I remember one of the most controversial ones was just how they portrayed, queer relationships and sort of how long it took them to have Ruby and Sapphire kiss,
Mm.
and, like, of course, their wedding spoiler alert, their wedding
Mhm.
was a big controversy, even though later it came out, just how Rebecca Sugar, like, pretty much threatened to quit if she didn't get that wedding, like, that's how intense it was and how difficult it was to get it screened, and, of course, the fandom was very angry that, like, "Oh, well, this just seems, slapdash, like, why did it take so long and blah, 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 this
Yeah.
seems so pointless, like, why are they doing the" Yeah, and I just remember thinking to myself at the time, like, this is the industry I want to go into where I'm going to be busting my ass to get representation out. And then I'm going to have people telling me that it wasn't enough. And then it won't even be my fault
Mm.
that it wasn't enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, like, with my own properties, because again, Steven Universe opened up my eyes to like knowing, like, I want to be able to portray things that haven't been able to make it on screen before. Like, I don't know how or like why, but I'd like to be a part of that movement, in adding diversity to media that is consumed by our population. And Steven Universe is also, in a way, a good sort of like, I guess, seeing like, how that goes, I guess, to the general
Mm.
public, especially to people who don't understand, like, how the industry works. There are so many more hoops than people realize going through. And I've had discussions with like even my like close friends, about these because some of them were on the same boat where it's just like, I don't think Steven Universe did a good job with its like queer relationships. And I'm just like, oh, The Legend of Korra was a really good example. The
Yeah.
ending kiss and Asami. Like, I remember getting in an argument with one of my best friends about it because they were just like, I just don't think they should have taken so long to do it. And I'm just like, that's how studio work. Like, it isn't really up to the team likely were pushing super hard for it, but at the end of the day, whoever has the most money has the most say in this production. And it's just, it's one of those things that like people who aren't in because then it's just like, well, they should have tried harder. And it's like,
Mm,
whenever I won't get into this because like, it's too much, but it's one of those things where it's like, even whenever you do get to add diversity, there is always going to be like lashback from the people that you made it from, and I feel that that's heartbreaking at times. But the outpouring of love from the fandom, and especially like I know I'm not the only person who's been inspired by Steven Universe to pursue a career in entertainment. Um, I don't know, criticism always cuts deeper than
positive.
praise
Yeah,
does.
absolutely.
Yeah. Um, but I don't know. I'd like to think that even though I have to preface everything I say positive about Steven Universe with I acknowledge its flaws,
Sure.
I I it has really made a big impact in my life actually, in terms of just pursuing creativity and understanding what the medium can do
Yeah.
for
Well,
people.
I think one of the things that you said in that is really powerful is like media that dares to be diverse is going to be put under a bigger microscopic lens. And I think the idea that you're talking about is really true because it feels like sometimes it can feel like kind of butting your head against a wall, right? Of like I'm doing as much as I possibly can and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to be enough. I think that's such a fair point that we don't talk a lot about on the creator side of things where we say like of course we want more and more diverse content and Steven Universe like when we're talking about the time of when it came out 2013 like it really did break a lot of barriers, it really did do a lot of things that hadn't been done yet, and of course you're not always going to get those things done right, but like you talked about with like sort of the expectations behind the scenes of like how a studio works, how things still have to be approved. They still have to be expected and or still have to sort of go through what's expected of you as a creator. And the sort of idea that it feels like maybe you're still going to always get people coming back and saying, well, you should have tried harder. You should have done more. Like, I wonder sometimes how you deal with that as a creator. Cause I know I struggle with it too, where it's like, okay, I'm putting out something that feels representative for me, feels like we're taking a step and feels like we're doing something, and then for the response to be sort of like, "Well, you should have done more." It can be sort of disheartening, but I think what is positive about everything that you said is that as much as there is someone saying this wasn't enough, or you could have done it better, or you could have tried harder, you could have fought harder, ultimately sometimes the answer is if you had fought harder, you wouldn't have gotten that first step on screen to begin with. Like the parts that do matter came out and got done, and they were able to inspire sort of the next generation of people to make the next steps and then the next steps and the next steps. And it's not always, unfortunately, it's not always just we can do whatever we want now because we said we wanted to.
Yeah, you know the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Mhm.
And I do think that in a way, some of it is just I'm trying to put this, like, in a light way in a way, but terminally online people do tend to be the loudest, and I okay, so my series is diverse, blah, 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 blah. People think it's only about the diversity. It's not. I wrote my story first, and then I added in my characters that I decided to make diverse because, quite frankly, I myself and, like, if I were to list out all my labels, I'd be like, "That's fucking weird. Why are you shoving your leftist agenda?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm sorry that I exist. What was unbelievable? Was it the left-handedness?" Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous to me, but, I think that but, like, on the flip side of that also, listing that have to list diversity in my like, in my selling point as well, because the audience that I am catering to and hoping to, like, I don't know, hoping to, I guess, ap not even appeal to, but just, like, an audience that I wanna connect with because it's the audience that I would be a part of.
Mm,
I know that I would wanna see labels because, like, I hate to say it, but, like, my lead romance is a male-female relationship. To a lot of people, they label it as hetero, which is unfortunate, because both of my leads are bi.
right.
So I will always like, whenever I'm trying to, like, pitch Brimstone and Roses, like, on Twitter specifically with that character limit, I'm like, "A bi disaster summons a demon. What happens next goes about as well as you expect."
Yeah.
But I just like I have to sprinkle in mentions of diversity, and it's like sometimes I feel kind of weird doing it. I
Mm,
feel like I'm having to like, I guess in a way, virtual signal myself. I hate the term virtue signaling, honestly, but it's really weird walking that fine line of like knowing how to properly market diversity without essentially getting jumped in a way. Because
yeah.
my series isn't really about diversity; it is about mental health, and it's about also ironically, or not even ironically, it was kind of intentional, sort of discovering yourself and like where you are once you get past certain points in your life. I actually wrote Brimstone and Roses while I was graduating college,
Mhm.
roughly, or I was about to. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Now that like didn't know what was going next, I knew I needed to find a job and that's it. And then somehow hope everything would be okay. And Bee's story, it starts off with her essentially struggling to make a living as an adult, in the adult world while everyone around her seems to be doing fine.
Right.
It was essentially me projecting my fear onto this character and then building up an absolutely insane story around it because it's fun, but it's also a place that I know I'm not the only one to have that feeling in.
No, I agree. I think sometimes it's frustrating with diverse content because you want to make content that is representative of what you want to see, like you said, like representative of the communities that you are a part of and the type of fandom that you would like to create or be a part of yourself. And so sometimes it does feel like you have to sort of market the parts of it that are that to attract those people. But then at the same time, like I would agree as someone who is a fan of Brimstone and Roses that that comic is not about diversity. It features diverse leads. And personally, that is more of what I am interested in as someone reading diverse content is to get to see characters that have full story arcs that don't necessarily relate to or depend upon their diversity and that they can have full character arcs just like a not like a as someone from the majority can, just like a character from the majority can. And so getting to see those characters go through, real struggles to struggle with mental health to explore those themes and to get to see them with characters that are your lead is a plus size non-white woman, a bisexual woman. And I think it's wonderful to get to read a comic that gets to have that representation, but that's not what her story is. Her story is not just that she's plus size. Her story is not that she is bisexual, and her story is not that she is a woman. It's that she summons a demon. Like these things are very fun, and it's a very fun story that we don't always get to see diverse leads at the center of. And so getting to see that and have that be the story is great. And I can see how it feels frustrating where it's like people come back and say, okay, well, you're only making it about that. Where it's like ultimately about as you said, like a disaster of a person, summoning a demon to take to a wedding. Like I don't know. I think it's really refreshing to me to be able to see it. And I think sometimes like I was interested in the way that you chose Steven Universe because I think that's similar where there is a story and it's a fantastical story and you get to see characters that you don't often get to see at the center of narratives at the center of that narrative. And I think that was part of what sort of broke a lot of barriers with that show was getting to see those characters and those character designs that are different and that are not necessarily always your main character get to go through the same type of fantasy world that people want to see themselves in, I think, to some degree.
Exactly.
So when it comes to Steven Universe, we've kind of talked a little bit about how like the show was able to tell you that you could take sort of steps to show diverse content and how that could work. Do you remember when you first started watching it if there was like a specific you mentioned that you watched the original pilot and that your friend had sent it to you. Do you remember if there was a specific kind of character or story arc that made you go like, "Oh man, I am hooked in. I just love this show," either outside of that space or just in general that made you connect with the piece of media itself?
I think that so I watched Steven Universe since it first came out. My friends were all hyped and they're my friends. I want to like the same things they do, so I watched it. Besides the music, of course, pulling me into it, because again, I love music. I love musicals. I love anything that like even touches on musical numbers. That is my shit. I love it. But I don't know why, but it's coming to mind one of the most I think I was like, I don't even know if this was the turning point for me in the series necessarily,
Mhm.
but one of the episodes that stuck with me from season 1 specifically was I think it was called like 100 Birthdays or something. And basically, spoilers for the episode, but Steven, because he is half gem, half human, he ages kind of weirdly.
Mhm.
And they found out that it like his age reflects how like mentally old he feels, how mentally mature he feels. And so it gets to the point where he just starts to feel extremely old to the where he becomes an old man and starts to die, which is insane in hindsight. But I just remember being like, what in the hell is going on? I don't really know, but I kind of like it. So I just remember watching that, just being like, wow, this is kind of dark. And I was like, I like dark stuff. And then from there, there was another episode called like Frybo where there wasn't even anything like emotionally potent about it other than like this weird like fry mascot just becomes this disgusting little creature that like starts attacking. It was nasty. It was very nasty. And then of course the season 1 finale where it's revealed that Garnet is a fusion, and
Mm,
then sort of like a huge insight into like the lore of Steven Universe and the real story, not just, filler. That was one of that like finale set with Jasper and like I think Peridot was in it or
mhm.
something, Lapis Lazuli, like the music, stunning. All of that, I was just like, this is what I'm talking about. This like emotional payoff of
Yeah.
watching through season 1 and then having strings connected, opening up more, and just sort of like being able to end it on such an intriguing note. I loved Steven Universe for that. And I think that since then I'd been a pretty big fan of it. The next seasons came out, and I'd argue that all the other seasons after it are much better. And I think part of that is because part of it, okay, this is all speculation. I have never talked to anyone on Steven Universe crew. I would like to clarify. I am a fan. I am not in the profession at all. But I do think that part of it is because whenever you're planning something, you kind of need to give a synopsis of what's happening. You need to know in advance.
Mm.
And I remember reading that Rebecca Sugar was already fighting for her life on Cartoon Network. And I think, quite frankly, at that time, they're kind of just like, okay, well, they fucking hate us. Let's do what we want then. And so from then on, they kind of just did what they wanted to an extent. And so they were able to push a lot more less, like, I don't want to say stupid humor, but like less humor that was more obviously aimed for children and more filler rather than content, because Steven Universe's story is just by concept alone rather dark.
Yeah.
And it's something that they, of course want to explore, but you can't explore that much, you can't explore dark content whenever you're trying to appeal to children, especially whenever you got that Y7 label on you.
Right.
Like there's a bunch of like I love animated TV shows. I've always loved them. But Steven Universe is whenever it was like a huge pivotal point where I was like, I can enjoy this as an adult too. Who cares?
Yeah.
But like another series that I really liked was Centaur World. However, I don't think Centaur World should have had the age rating that it did, because it is badly hindered from its actual plot, which is great,
Mm.
by having to appeal to a young audience. It's really unfortunate to see, because you can tell what the like the creative studio wanted to do, and then you can tell where the studio stepped in and said, hey, that's really messed up, add a fart joke please, and it ruins the pacing so badly as a result.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times, like, one of the things that I really wanted to cover when we started doing this show is the idea that sort of there can be a feeling that like, oh, this thing is for kids, this isn't for me, or this is embarrassing to love. And I think when you talk about Cartoon Network and animated shows in general, there can be that sort of association, like you mentioned, like the Y7 label, like you, this is for kids. And it feels like with Steven Universe and there's other shows in this vein too, like Avatar is something that people love and that continue to love, but perhaps started to watch as kids and have grown up with it. But Avatar: The Last Airbender is also quite dark when you truly process what we're talking about. It's a war movie. I mean, it's a war show. Legend of Korra as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I love Legend of Korra.
Legend of Korra is great. And I think when you look at that, do you feel like animation has sort of the connotation of this is for kids, whether it is for kids or not for kids, and regardless of the story content itself?
I think that definitely in recent times, maybe not when Steven Universe came out, but in recent times, animation being for adults, being for everyone mostly, it's definitely become more accepted, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Of course, especially with like Arcane coming out, that of course blew open the in Spider Verse, into the Spider Verse,
Mhm.
that created a much more open discussion of animation being enjoyed by all. And of course, there's always the conversations, during the Oscars, like why animation is counted as a genre instead of, what it is a medium, not a genre.
Right.
That being said, I mean, at the time, so I'm from a very small town. Like when I say small, I mean one girl in high school just straight up didn't really comprehend that music exists in like other countries small.
Oh.
Because one time I was listening to freaking like I think French pop or something, and she was like, "They have music over there," and I'm like,
Oh, no.
girl, like, listen, I know that like the Louisiana education system isn't great, but this is what the hell? It's bad. But so very small. I had no one to talk to like in my like, personal sphere, no one to really talk to about my, animation passion. My sister, bless her heart, she is so strong. She is so strong for dealing with my annoying ass because she has always been not always by her choice, but she has always been like open to talking with me about things that I like, which is very kind of her because my god, my freaking god, I whenever I hyperfixate on things, I don't shut the hell up about them. So and I think she did actually entertain and watch a few of the episodes with me. They were okay to her. She's not quite as like invested in
Mm,
that, kind of stuff as I am, but she did enjoy like other adult animation, explicitly adult, such as Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman,
sure.
um, that kind of stuff. And she's actually the one who like pushed me into watching Legend of Korra, ironically, which is one of the series that like I got a lot of my artistic inspiration from in terms of art style,
Mhm.
at least initially. These days I've pivoted away from it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's cool as you go through your thinking, as you're listing all of the other shows, there's so many that have come out now that are specifically geared towards adults. So, like a BoJack Horseman, a Rick and Morty, an Archer. There is much more of an accepted adult animation now. But I think it's cool that a lot of the animation that you're talking about may have been geared towards kids, but has sort of, as you talked about earlier, that darker element that you can pull something from and still
Yeah,
connect to.
it's like I hate to say it because I hate to give them credit, but and I think you know where I'm about to go with this, but Bronies did help make animation for children more acceptable by the general populace. Do I hate to say it and give them credit because Bronies Ooh, I have thoughts on that. But in a way, the yes, My Little Pony and the fan base that it cultivated did also sort of bring into question, animation is for everyone. Animation can hold deeper themes. And also, like animation, it doesn't even, in my opinion, personally, animation doesn't have to have deeper themes or anything to be for adults. Like
Mm,
animated stuff is just fun. Like
yeah.
it's nice, it's funny, it's sometimes we don't wanna watch freaking Chris Pratt trek through the woods or, like, freaking Leonardo DiCaprio eat a goddamn elk heart. Sometimes we
Sure.
just wanna see some funny little characters doing their weird little dances on screen,
No,
and
that's
I
so
think that
true.
should be acceptable,
Well,
that's all I'm
yeah.
saying.
No, I agree with that. I would say, like, it's so funny when you think about it where it's, like, shows like The Office, which have I'm not shitting on The Office, but it's not a dark
That's okay, I
like
will.
yeah, but it's like, like, everybody loves that show, everybody loves Friends, like, but I think, like, you have these shows and just by virtue of having, like, movie stars in them, people are like, "Oh, they're for adults and they're fine," and you can have sort of like a lighthearted show, but the second that you make it animated, it feels like, "Oh, it's for" like, the lightheartedness of it isn't acceptable, and I think there's something kind of, like, depressing about that, that people don't believe adults should have carefree
Good fun.
entertainment. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that's, like, a lot of what's been sort of challenged lately just in culture as well. Because this is totally off topic, but I know that there has been a lot of discussion of, like, how women dress and how that kind of age like, they are not expected to wear, like, bright colors,
Mm,
like, after a certain age, or it's, like, women who are, like, in their 50s or, like, 60s even wearing very, like, cutesy, like, pink, a lot of frills, stuff that you would see more of, like, maybe in, like, kawaii culture, you know what I mean?
sure.
Um I probably mispronounced that, no one I mean, but yeah, sort of that discussion of, like, why exactly are we expected to have to dress maturely? Like, who made that rule? Like, it's a societal rule, of course, or "rule," quote, unquote, but, there's nothing really enforcing that, and whenever you strip it down to, like, what like, people who enjoy doing what they do regardless of societal expectations, you see a lot of people will indulge in things that are deemed for children,
Mm.
when in fact, it's just fun. It's fun to be able to do what you want, and to enjoy what you want with adult money,
Yeah.
you know?
I agree. I think it's like that we talked about TikTok a little bit earlier, but that one audio where it's like, "The problem with having adult money is that I can spend it on whatever I want." I do think, like, there is this hopefully now we're starting to push past it, but, like, this idea that it's not acceptable after a certain age to just have fun, and I feel like we need more of that, especially after everything that we've gone through sort of, like, as a global culture in the last 3 years in general.
I do feel, yeah, also, like, people being stuck at home has sort of also made them revisit old hobbies and passions that they loved maybe as kids, maybe when they were younger. And that's also been really nice to see how many people like rediscovered something that they liked to do when they were younger and then were encouraged or like just didn't have time for anymore.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's always a little bit depressing to see, how much the arts could thrive if we weren't living in a capitalist hellscape. Sorry, that we can cut that to if needed. But I'm very bitter. I'm not gonna lie. I have to do my taxes still this month, and I'm
Oh,
mad about it.
yeah.
I'm big mad about it.
No, I think yeah, I think sometimes I think it's a lot of, like, the idea of needing to seem cool after a certain age. I know that for me that happened even before I was looking at, like, career or, what am I gonna do with my life. There was, like, a level of when I left high school and went to college of the idea of, like, "Oh, are people going to think that I'm worth knowing? Like, are people going to think I'm cool?" And in that, you start to, like, collectively shed the things that you really enjoy because you're, for some reason, too enthusiastic, and for some reason, I think people think being too enthusiastic is not cool, and that idea of cool, I think, can get so overwhelming and can kind of cause you to just stop enjoying things that you actually enjoy, and I talk a lot about this with a friend of mine who basically she talks a lot about kind of, like, peak TV and, like, what everyone enjoys, and how, one show will go really popular, like Game of Thrones was super popular and everyone was watching it, but, like, if you don't like fantasy, if you don't like those types of dramas, if you have certain content triggers that are not good for you, it's not a show that you would enjoy watching, and it's okay to watch something else and to be enthusiastic about something else, and there's almost just, like, this homogenization of, like, what is acceptable to be passionate about, and I hope that we're starting to turn away from that and that we're starting to turn back to, like we said earlier, like, cringe is dead. But I think it's funny that you said cringe is dead except for me, because there is still that, like, I don't wanna talk about it. I don't want someone to think I'm uncool, you know?
No, so true, so true. I was gonna say, and I kept like barely saying my, but I feel like, a lot of the things that people expect adults to have to do in their freedom is depressingly enough, I think drinking is really common in our
Mm,
society. They expect, drinking, partying, a lot of drinking. Just I feel like drinking is the most socially acceptable thing to do as an adult, which is wild because I personally do not drink. I am what the kids call straight edge. And it was something that I found even more interesting as an adult and like going through college, also just not enjoying partying personally.
mm,
I'm too introverted for it. Is one, feeling a weird need to justify myself sometimes to people.
mhm.
But even weirder than that, what I found is whenever you tell people that you don't enjoy that, they get self conscious about it too. And they start trying to justify why they need to do it. And it's very interesting. It's interesting to see that we are all really just embarrassed, I guess, to be alive. It is truly just a constant circle of mortification, in my opinion. And you know what? I agree with that. But I remember in college just like explaining to some friends, like, I don't drink, I don't enjoy it, and I'm not really interested in smoking. You guys can do it though. Like, I don't care. I just personally won't partake. And I remember being in the elevator with one friend, and she started essentially, telling me, like, oh, well, I only drink in social situations. I don't really drink that much, blah, blah. But prior to that, she had been telling me how often she like goes to bars and
Mm,
drinks and parties and stuff. And so I was just like, and I'm sure that with the creative industry, I know that a lot of artists have a lot of issues with self-esteem. It's just, we're more sensitive,
sure.
which fair. I've definitely been there, make no mistake. But especially whenever I was in college, I just kind of had a feeling that it was almost, like if I said something, then other people would start trying to justify why they did things, or like they'd be like, oh, well, actually, I like that too. And I'm just like, so I don't really know what's going on here, but just pick what you like and then we can talk. And if you don't like the same things, that's fine. There are other people that will like the same things. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this sort of like I I like the way you said it, which is like we're just sort of constantly embarrassed to be alive. But this idea that like you can't dislike something that someone else likes or you have to justify it. You're trying to sort of constantly fit yourself into a box, and I think that can get you to the point where you stop picking the things that you actually enjoy and having an enjoyment out of life and finding that passion. And I do wonder, like you said, with the last kind of being inside years, do we have we started to revert to the things that we actually liked because you're not required to sort of present yourself to someone else? You actually physically can't. So is that part of why people are starting to go back to like the things that they're passionate about when they don't have the need to be perceived as cool or to be perceived as like someone else in some way.
I mean, that's definitely interesting to put out. I do think that obviously social media and TikTok,
Mm,
of course, has become a lot more prevalent. And in a way, it's like the counterculture because it's okay to be weird. You get views being fucking weird as hell. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so that
absolutely.
in a way, it's like it's interesting this culture that we've cultivated, if
Yeah.
you get what I mean. Authenticity, I think, is just a very difficult thing to be,
Mm,
no matter how strong your resolve is, just because at the end of the day, a lot of people don't like authenticity. It doesn't make money, and that is the biggest problem, I
yeah.
think. And obviously, we mentioned this earlier, but like when you are a content creator, even whenever you want to tell these stories, you do need to also look on the commercial point. And it's something that a lot of creators kind of hate to say. And it's something that a lot of, fine arts people or like people who are kind of very shunning of commercial art say like, oh, you sold out and blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
The starving artist idea is very glamorized, being like, I draw what I want. I don't have to follow the man. And it's like, that's ideal. But also, I like eating food and having lights on. So, I think it's just interesting. I think it's interesting, but I do think it's nice that, with these properties that are slowly becoming more accepted for like adults to be interested in. Like I know there's a bunch of people. I went on a okay, so the new Puss in Boots movie,
Mm.
fantastic,
I
beautiful, great.
loved that movie, yeah.
So good. I went out and I was like, I went out for Pokemon Go actually, one of my quote unquote cringe hobbies. It's not, it's fun. But I had met a bunch of people through it and a bunch of people that were roughly around my age. And I had like in the past, I'm always a little hesitant to like bring up animated films to people.
Mm.
Not because maybe it's because I'm a little bit ashamed of it, but more it's just like I don't feel like dealing with somebody like, Lil, why do you watch kid shows? And I've been getting that less and less often. But I remember mentioning like, oh well, I've heard that like the Puss in Boots movie was really good. I was going on a date with this guy, and he was like, "Oh, I actually already saw it. It's really good. I'd definitely go see it again." And I just remember being really surprised by that,
Mm.
to be honest, because this guy was like a partier, like very social, very act. And I just remember being kind of taken aback. I was like, "You saw Puss in Boots?" I was like,
So you're sort of, like, projecting that same thing on him that you hate have
"No, I
projected
wasn't
on
even like."
yourself.
It wasn't even like me being judgmental necessarily. I was just like pleasantly surprised because I
Mm.
was like, "Oh my god!" Like have we gotten to that point where, people in their, like, 20s aren't ashamed to, like, talk about liking animated films about a cat in a hat?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and I also that movie in particular, because you mentioned the Oscars earlier and this idea of, like, why is it treated as a genre rather than a medium? And Puss in Boots was one that in particular, and also, the one that ultimately ended up winning Best Animated Film this year, Guillermo del Toro's, Pinocchio, like, those movies were to me, they were incredible films, and Puss in Boots in particular, like, I went to go see it kind of like I was like, "Oh, I love Shrek and I love Antonio Banderas, and I'm off to go see this movie," but the art style is completely different. The story behind it of sort of like, and it's funny and it's enjoyable and it's like it's about a cat cheating death and like 9 lives and all these things when you have like this large conversation about mortality and a fear of death. And it's a movie that like a bunch of adults should have seen because it was a great movie. But because you put it in that separate category, there is that feeling of like, "Oh, are people gonna see this? Are they gonna see Puss in Boots? Are they gonna enjoy it?" But I agree, it's nice to see like that starting to spread out of people being like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go see it. I like it. I like that talking cat. I would like to go see that." Like, I think it's good. Well, one other thing I wanted to ask you about sort of Steven Universe in particular, and then I wanna talk about, Brimstone and Roses and sort of your journey into becoming a creator yourself. But one thing I'm curious about is we've talked a lot about like the internet now, but the internet in 2013 was a totally different place, I think. And you mentioned sort of like Tumblr going wild for Steven Universe in particular. And I'm kind of curious about your experience watching the show and engaging with the fandom itself growing up at that time.
Sure. It's an interesting one, let me tell you that.
Thank you so much for joining me this week on You Are What You Love. May and I had a ton to talk about when it came to Steven Universe, and also about her journey as she transitioned from fan to creator herself. Join me next week for the second part of this conversation, where we'll talk about what it was like to be a Steven Universe fan on the internet while the show was airing, how things have changed since, and how May took her inspiration and moved into being a creator with her own properties. Between now and next Wednesday, if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on social media at Marissa Kumari, anywhere you get your social media fix. You can also sign up for my newsletter by going to our website, tandonproductions.com, clicking on You Are What You Love, and signing up there. I send out an issue with every episode of this podcast. And we just started a Discord server, so if you want to connect with me, with other listeners, and talk about the types of things that we are talking about on this show, you can join that by clicking on the link in the episode description. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.